Every kitchen in 1953 had a bread box on the counter. Every single one. Today, you could walk through 100 American homes and maybe find two, both being used to store batteries and takeout menus. Somewhere between Eisenhower and the iPhone, an entire ecosystem of kitchen tools simply vanished. Not because they broke, because we forgot what they were for. We should start with the one that was already dying in 1950, the icebox. Not a refrigerator, an actual icebox. A wooden cabinet, usually oak, lined with tin or zinc, with a compartment up top where you placed a block of ice. The ice melted, cold air sank, your food stayed cool. That was the entire technology. No compressor, no freon, no electricity. Just gravity and a slowly shrinking block of ice that a man delivered to your door 3 times a week. By 1950, most American homes had electric refrigerators. But the icebox didn't vanish overnight. In rural areas, in tenements, in the poorer corners of Appalachia and the Deep South, iceboxes persisted well into the mid-50s. The ice delivery industry employed over 100,000 Americans in 1940. 10 years later, most of them were driving trucks for other companies. The entire profession, Iceman, dissolved within a single decade. Kids who grew up leaving cardboard signs in the window reading 25 pounds today suddenly had mothers bragging about the new Frigidaire. What gets lost in that triumphant upgrade narrative? Icebox food tasted different. The humidity was higher. Cheese didn't dry out. Vegetables kept their texture longer. Modern refrigerators are essentially dehydrators that happen to be cold. The icebox was a humid cave. Some things worked better in the cave. Next to the icebox, or by 1952, next to the Frigidaire, sat the bread box. A metal or wooden container, usually ventilated with small holes or a roll-top lid, purpose-built for one thing: keeping bread edible for a week. This sounds absurd now. Modern bread lasts approximately 48 hours on a counter before it either molds or turns into a crouton. But 1950s bread was different. Women baked it at home or bought it fresh from a bakery with no preservatives. That bread needed airflow and darkness. The bread box provided both. It created a micro-environment, not too dry, not too humid, where a loaf could stay soft for 5 to 7 days. The bread box disappeared for the simplest possible reason. Bread changed. Once manufacturers figured out how to pump loaves full of calcium propionate and potassium sorbate, shelf life extended to weeks. The plastic bag replaced the bread box. Homemade bread became a hobby instead of a chore. The bread box became a decoration, then a thrift store curiosity, then nothing. Now the stovetop toaster. This one requires some explanation because the concept itself sounds like a safety violation. Picture a tin pyramid, open on all sides, about 6 inches tall, that you placed directly over a gas burner. You leaned slices of bread against the sides. The radiant heat from the flame toasted them, one side at a time. You had to stand there, watch, flip each slice manually, 4 minutes per 2 slices, your complete attention. Or fire. The pop-up electric toaster existed since 1926. The Toastmaster 101 could brown both sides simultaneously and eject the toast when done. But stovetop toasters persisted into the mid-50s because they cost 15 cents. The electric toaster cost $12 to $18, roughly $150 in today's money. For a decade, Americans chose fire watching over spending. The moment toasters dropped below $5 in the late 50s, the stovetop version vanished within 3 years. Nobody mourned it. Nobody should have. It was objectively terrible. The hand-crank egg beater, though, that one deserves a different eulogy. 2 interlocking gears, a handle you turned by hand, twin beaters spinning in a bowl. The mechanical egg beater was patented in 1856, and by the 1950s, it occupied a drawer in essentially every American kitchen. Women used them for whipping cream, beating eggs, mixing batters. The motion was specific. You held the beater vertically in one hand and cranked with the other, which meant you needed a third hand to hold the bowl steady, which meant you wedged the bowl against your hip or braced it against the counter with your stomach. An ergonomic disaster that somehow produced perfect meringue. The electric hand mixer killed it. Sunbeam's Mix Master had existed since 1930, but the affordable handheld electric beater didn't become universal until the early 60s. Once it did, the hand crank version retreated to camping gear and Amish kitchens. The thing nobody admits? The hand crank beater gave you more control. You could feel the resistance change as egg whites stiffened. You knew by the tension in the handle when soft peaks became stiff peaks. The electric mixer just screams at one speed until you overbeat everything into dry foam. Professional pastry chefs to this day will tell you that hand whisking produces better texture. They just won't tell you it takes 4 times as long and makes your forearm feel like it's going to detach. The flour sifter. A tin canister with a mesh screen at the bottom and a crank or squeeze mechanism that forced flour through the screen. Every recipe in every 1950s cookbook began with sift flour as step 1. Not optional, not a suggestion, a requirement. Because flour in the 50s was different. It came in large sacks, 25 and 50-pound bags, stored in kitchen bins, and it compacted. It clumped. It attracted weevils. Sifting did 3 things. Broke up lumps, aerated the flour for accurate measuring, and caught any insects that had taken up residence since your last baking day. Modern flour comes pre-sifted in 5-pound bags, sealed in plastic. The weevil problem is essentially solved by packaging. The compaction problem is solved by smaller quantities and the fluff and spoon measuring method that every food blogger now teaches. The flour sifter didn't disappear because a better tool replaced it. It disappeared because the problem it solved no longer existed. Though if you've ever made a cake with sifted flour versus unsifted, you know the texture difference is real. About 15% more air incorporation, which translates to a noticeably lighter crumb. The modern solution is just to pretend that difference doesn't matter. The pressure canner. Not a pressure cooker, a pressure canner. Larger, heavier, with a weighted gauge on top that rocked and hissed like an angry radiator. In 1950, 42% of American households did some form of home canning. Tomatoes, green beans, peaches, jams, pickled everything. The pressure canner was essential for any low-acid food. Without it, you risked botulism, which is not a flavor profile anyone aspires to. These units weighed 15 to 20 pounds, held 7-quart jars at once, and operated at 15 pounds per square inch of pressure. The temperature inside reached 240 degrees Fahrenheit, hot enough to kill Clostridium botulinum spores, hot enough to warp the lid if your gasket failed, and hot enough to embed jar fragments in a kitchen ceiling if something went genuinely wrong. By 1970, home canning had dropped to about 12% of households. By 2000, a niche hobby. The reasons stack neatly. Women entered the workforce and lost the 6 to 8 hours per week that canning demanded. Supermarkets expanded year-round produce sections, freezers got larger and cheaper, and a generation of women decided that spending August in a 100-degree kitchen processing 40 pounds of tomatoes was not, in fact, the pinnacle of domestic achievement. The pressure canner retreated to Mormon pantries, survivalist basements, and grandmother's closets. The quiet truth nobody puts on a lifestyle blog. Home-canned tomatoes are better. Measurably, objectively better. The varieties you grow for canning are chosen for flavor, not shipping durability. You process them at peak ripeness, not 2 weeks early. A jar of home-canned San Marzanos tastes like a different species from the tin you buy at the grocery store. The pressure canner didn't fail. We just collectively decided that convenience outranks flavor, which is the entire story of American food from 1960 to 2000, compressed into one sentence. One more. The wall-mounted can opener. Not the electric kind that hums on your countertop, the hand-cranked unit screwed permanently into the wall or the underside of a cabinet. The Swing-Away, the Rival, the Edlund, brands that dominated kitchens for 30 years. You clamped the can, turned the butterfly handle, and the blade traced the rim. Mounted at exactly the right height, always to the right of the sink, always at elbow level. Every kitchen had one. Every kitchen had a specific spot where the paint was slightly chipped from the mounting bracket. They vanished because cans got pull tabs, because electric openers cost $8, because kitchens got renovated and nobody wanted a visible mechanical device screwed into their new cabinets. The wall-mounted opener joined the phone on the wall and the pencil sharpener by the door frame, functional objects that required a permanent address in your home and lost their lease when the world went portable. So that's the inventory. Icebox, bread box, stovetop toaster, hand crank beater, flour sifter, pressure canner, wall-mounted can opener. 7 tools that occupied every American kitchen for decades, each solving a specific daily problem that either no longer exists or that we've decided we don't care about solving well. The stovetop toaster was genuinely bad. Nobody needs it back. The electric mixer is legitimately better in almost every way. But the bread box, the flour sifter, the pressure canner, the hand crank beater, they didn't lose on merit. They lost on time. They required presence, attention, a person standing in the kitchen doing one thing slowly instead of 4 things simultaneously. The 1950s kitchen wasn't better, more labor-intensive, more dangerous, designed around the assumption that one person, always a woman, would spend 4 to 6 hours a day in it. But some of those tools carried knowledge in their mechanisms. The flour sifter knew about weevils. The bread box knew about humidity. The pressure canner knew about botulism. We threw away the tools and kept the problems. We just started solving them with chemistry and plastic instead of tin and attention. The bread box is still $15 on the internet. The flour sifter still works exactly as it did in 1953. If you want them back, they're waiting. They're just not waiting in the kitchen anymore.